Hello, friend, and welcome back to another episode of Artworks for Teachers. I'm your host, Susan Riley, and I have to ask the question, how often do you think that simplicity would be just so much easier than all of the craziness that we often have around us, right? Oftentimes I find myself wishing, oh, I wish this could just be easier. I wish this could just be simpler, especially when you're thinking about all the tasks that you have to do, all of the requirements that are thrown on us as educators, and let's not forget our personal lives, right? All of the other things that we have going on at any given moment. Well, I'm so excited to introduce you today to Dave Stewart Jr. He is a practicing educator. He works in high schools in Minnesota, but he is also an author and a professional developer, and he offers speaking and keynotes all around the world. And Dave comes on the show today to talk about the simplicity and getting back to the simplicity of educating and teaching our students so that we can focus on just the things that really matter. And I think in an age and a time when there are so many things being tossed at us, that when we go back to the basics and we just consider what are the simple main components of the things that are actually going to work and move the needle for our students, so many other possibilities open up, and it allows us to say no to the things that just don't matter. So Dave is going to share with us how to do that today. He's also going to talk about student motivation. And there's a key moment in this interview that I want you to listen for when we're talking about student motivation. And he talks about the number one, or maybe the biggest killer of student motivation that you could experience. And it might be something that you've never considered before. So without further ado, here's Dave. Hi there, Dave. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. To get started, how about if you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as both a teacher and as an author?
Okay, I've been teaching for about 20 years, secondary English language arts and history. I've taught in Baltimore, and I currently teach in Michigan, where I live with my family. And about 12 years ago, I started to write a blog for teachers. At that time, I was focused on understanding the standards documents that applied to my setting. And since then, I've written a few books and done professional development for teachers around the world on just really kind of fundamentals of teaching. That's really what I write about. It's what I focus about in my classroom. So if you had to summarize my approach, it's all about more learning with less stress. Less stress for students, less stress for me, and more learning for all of us.
I love that. And in my research for the episode, I actually found that you quit teaching at one point. Is that true?
Yeah. I taught for 3 years, and I was trying to be the heroes from the movies. Classic new teacher, trying to be all things for all people, working crazy hours, nonstop, around the clock, no boundaries. And I just couldn't imagine how I was going to be able to, have a family and a life and also teach. So I quit for a year and did a lot of soul searching. And when I came back, that was kind of when I knew I needed to do this. I felt compelled to be a teacher, but I was going to have to find a simpler way to do it.
Mm. And so what did you discover? So how is the second time around different so that you weren't burnt out?
Yeah, I mean, I really started to take seriously teachers in my building that were getting great results with students and were well regarded, but also seemed to have a good life. They seemed to be people who read a lot of the research and the literature and just slowly over time had honed their craft. I just quickly became apparent that being a great teacher is not about looking like the Hollywood archetypes. It's really about kind of good, well-designed lessons, good, strong working relationships with students. And then the more that I wrote, so my writing really guided a lot of my simplifications over time. The more I just started to hone in on some basic things that I knew if I could just get good at a few things, that I'd be a good teacher. And so that's really it.
That's amazing. And I think it's something that many teachers forget, is that sometimes the best PD, the best way to learn, is just from other colleagues in your building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best PD is typically down the hall. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. So now you've written two best-selling books, The Will to Learn and These Six Things.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write each of them? Because they are different.
Yeah.
And what do you hope that educators take away from them?
Yeah. So I mentioned that I began writing about standards, and I was focused on the Common Core, and there were, several dozen of these standards, and it was a much reduced list from previous iterations of standards, but it was still too many things. And so as I just started to look for patterns and try to identify what are the basic components of these standards and standards for other disciplines. And so that's where these six things came from. It came from if I could just get really good at using my class time to cultivate student motivation, get kids thinking argumentatively, get them building knowledge, and get them reading and writing and speaking, those six things. If I could just get good at that, doing that type of stuff intelligently in a way that was responsive to my students, mindful of the subjects that I'm tasked with teaching, that I would do a good job. And that's what these six things is all about.
Mm,
Uh,
okay.
but as I was writing these six things, so that came out in 2018,
Mhm.
there was just so much that I was coming across in the research and in my classroom related to student motivation that by the time these six things was out into the world, I knew my next book needed to be on just that topic,
Mhm.
just chapter two of these six things. I knew there's like a whole book's worth of ideas there.
Mhm.
And so that's what The Will to Learn is about. So The Will to Learn came out in 2023,
Mhm.
and it's really just an extended deep dive into what I call the five key beliefs beneath student motivation.
Mm,
So yeah, and people always ask me, how many books have you written? I always say, well, there's really only two that I would recommend. Um, because I've written a couple of others, but those two books really are just like page for page, very dense with meaning to me and meaning to the folks who have read them.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the overview.
So I'm curious about in the will to learn because student motivation, especially after COVID, has been such a
Yeah.
hot topic for so many. What was there any surprises for you as you went through the research on what actually motivates students versus what we might be doing that doesn't do a darn thing?
So yeah, what surprised me is that students can be well motivated in all different types of curricula. So I saw a lot of attention, there's so much attention on new pedagogies, or just like totally revamping the whole curricula. So student directed learning only is the best. Project based learning only is the best. And what I discovered is that actually what these approaches can sometimes do is they cultivate beliefs about learning in students.
Mhm.
But if we can just understand how those beliefs work, then we don't need to think, oh, if I just revamp my whole curriculum,
Mhm.
then student motivation would be better. We actually can improve student motivation in all different types of settings by just apprenticing ourselves to these basic beliefs that students have or don't have,
Mhm.
and just watching how really simple things done consistently over time can cultivate these beliefs, in even our hardest cases of students. And you're right, it's it's gotten more difficult
Mhm.
since COVID. I agree with that, and I've seen that in my class. But it's not like things were all golden pre-COVID either. So I think COVID just kind of took the took the lid off of a problem that was always there.
Yeah.
Um, so this book is really meant to. I mean, it came out post COVID, but it really wasn't a reaction to COVID, so much as just a reaction to a timeless obstacle
Mhm.
that students and teachers face.
Mm. Um, what I love about your approach and what you're sharing is that it's so simple. It's streamlined, it's simple. But what I often find with simplicity, very often in poetry or in writing or in everyday life, is that what seems simple is often difficult to
Yeah.
actually implement. And one of the things that I can already hear teachers saying is, yes, this sounds great, but I have this from my administrator and I have all of these
hmm
other things. And how do I simplify when I have all of these other demands on my plate? So, what would you say to those teachers?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the demands on our plate, I think that this is a problem that we all feel. And I understand that sometimes in some settings, like these demands are especially heightened. I just always return to what is actually possible. I can't do all the things I'm expected to do with excellence.
Mhm.
So an idea that I write about in these 6 things is it's actually from a Nobel Prize winning economist from in the 50s. It's called satisficing. And it's this idea of deciding that for many of your tasks, you're just going to do them at the satisfactory level. You're not going to do them with excellence. I think that satisficing, it should almost be like a semester-long course in teacher prep programs, how to satisfice, how to identify things that ought to be satisfied. And so a lot of times, things like much of the grading that we do can be satisfied. And thinking about giving students good feedback that helps them grow, that cultivates motivation, that's the type of thing to be excellent at.
Mm.
But even there, you can satisfy that with like how frequently you're giving the kind of feedback that helps students to learn, and the degree to which that's individualized to every last student versus whole class feedback on patterns.
Mm.
So satisficing, like if there's one thing that an overwhelmed teacher takes away from this podcast, satisficing. Look it up, read some articles, and really give yourself permission to satisfy, because it's impossible to do all the things that we are supposed to do at the level of excellence. It's not possible. And it's not necessary to do all the things we're expected to do at the level of excellence to be a good teacher.
Yeah, I agree. And I know it's something that I struggle with. I laughingly call myself a type A, that everything's got to be perfect, but that's not reality for so many. How do you decide what can be satisfied versus what we need to actually spend the time on and in mastering and becoming excellent?
So, I mean, this is really the genesis of these 6 things. So my argument in that book is if there's a few areas you want to get really good at and just put a lot of time and labor into thinking about them and experimenting and getting better, it would be those 6 things. And then, a lot of the minutia stuff. Like, I just don't think that you need to be excellent at email to be a good teacher. I don't think that you can be excellent at email and be a good teacher. At least I can't. Because for me to be excellent at email, however we're going to define that, it would just require me to constantly be putting my attention on this relatively low leverage source of work. Most of the emails that I receive, read, that I send, they don't do a ton to improve me as a teacher, to improve outcomes for my students. So that's an area that I would satisfy. I come back to grading. And I think that, I know that there are schools where there's crazy expectations on teachers for the number of things that they ought to grade. And I would encourage people to push back on some of these expectations. I'm not saying to be irresponsible with grading, but, Kelly Gallagher, a big English language arts thinker and writer, is prone to saying, if I'm grading everything that my students write, then they're not writing enough. Because it's just not possible for me to grade all the amount of work that really my students are going to need to do in writing if they're going to get good, because they just need to be doing a lot of writing. So my students write every day in my history classes, and I'm grading very, very little of that writing because it's not required. I don't need to grade all these things that they're writing in order for them to improve as writers. And student improvement should always be what we as professionals focus on. How do I help my students to improve?
Yes.
And when people say, well, you need 10 grades in the grade book per week, I'm going to respectfully push back on that, because my core job is to help my students to improve.
Right.
Yeah,
100%. 100%. So what makes this really powerful is that you're still in the classroom, Dave. So why, first of all, is that important to you? And secondly, how do you balance being in the classroom with being an author and a speaker and an online professional developer?
Why is that important, and how do I balance that?
Yeah.
These are existential questions I still ask myself on a regular basis. Well, it's important because I think as a creator of ideas and recommendations for teachers, I need to be putting the boots on the ground in my own practice every day. I need to be testing this stuff
Mhm.
all the time. I need my demotivated students. I
Mm.
need them. I need them because it's when I meet them and we together are trying to get to a place where they can actually be motivated in school. That's where I can have assurance that this stuff actually works.
Yeah.
And that's where I can also uncover the things that make this stuff hard, because you made an excellent point. Things that appear simple, which almost everything I write about appears very simple, and it's intentionally simple, but it just is very difficult. It takes, I mean, I think I'll still be getting better at this stuff in my classroom in, you know, 10 years from now. I'll
Yeah.
still be learning things.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to me. And how do I balance? Satisficing it comes to the rescue again. People ask me, how do you do it all? And I always say, I definitely don't. You
Mm.
know, like I'm not a person who's taking on extra roles in my school, for example. Maybe I could, maybe I should, but I just realistically can't. So I'm not a
Mm.
leader of the PLC or the department. I'm not a coach for a sports team. So these are just choices that I've made, no's that I've said to allow for the yes of being in the classroom and also being a writer and a PD provider from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah. Oftentimes our no's are the best thing we can do in order to provide ourselves with a bigger yes later.
Yeah, yeah.
You often talk about the importance of teacher well-being as well in order to impact student success. So can you talk more about how supporting teachers can lead to better outcomes for students?
I mean, I always say that when teachers are flourishing, students will tend to flourish too.
Mm.
When teachers are growing and feel like they're optimally pressured, then students will tend to have a similar experience. So there's a little old tool that I use to unpack this with teachers called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which basically shows like a little bell-shaped curve, and as pressure increases, if there's no pressure, then you're actually not going to do very well. You need a little bit of pressure to do well. A lot of our students are under pressured, and it's why they underperform. So you move pressure along, and your performance starts to increase. But if the pressure keeps going up too much, then you end up back down at the bottom. So your performance is low, and you're also miserable.
Right.
So, I mean, this is why teacher well-being is so important. If your teachers are just miserable and overwhelmed, this is a serious problem
Yeah.
to pay attention to. And typically for leaders, like what you need to do there is really look at what you're expecting teachers to do.
Mhm.
Try to understand where is all their time going? Where's this pressure coming from? And seek to alleviate those things. It's not something that you can fix with a teacher wellness day, okay, or a teacher wellness PD. That's not going to work. You need to equip your teachers to really appraise their level of pressure and give them permission to take some things, to say some more no's,
Mhm.
so that their yeses can be of higher quality.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right that oftentimes we discount the need for pressure, that there is a really good sweet spot for so many
Yeah.
of us. And I know for me, once I stepped out of the classroom, I moved this to my employees. I often check in with them in terms of, are you challenged enough? Are you overwhelmed? And where is that balance?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important. One of the other frameworks that you use is the PERMA framework, or
Yeah.
you talk about this. First of all, what is it? And then how can school leaders and teachers foster these elements in their work?
Yeah. So Marty Seligman was kind of a leader in the positive psychology movement, which is just this idea of studying human flourishing versus studying like psychological problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he basically did is developed this short list of things that typify a flourishing human being. PERMA, so positive emotion, engagement, relatedness, meaning, and achievement.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of PERMA is that, if I want to like appraise my current level of flourishing, I can do things like look at, well, how frequently in a school day am I experiencing positive emotion? Is there anything that I can do to increase that?
Mm-hmm.
Engagement. Am I engaged with what I'm teaching, or am I kind of becoming disengaged? Relatedness. Am I connecting with other people? or not? Meaning, do I feel like there's a sense of meaning in my job? If not, could I do anything to improve that? And then achievement. Is there any mountain that I'm trying to climb? Is there any goal that I'm trying to meet this year?
Mhm.
So, it's a helpful description of what we all would like, what our
Mhm.
hearts long for. And I think it's really helpful then to use as a tool, and my bias is always, what do I control? Right? Because
Mhm.
I think that my bosses influence my perma, my job conditions influence my perma. But at the end of the day, the thing I'm most in control of is me. So, if I'm spending every down minute on my screen and I'm like, used to being engaged by my phone, then well, maybe that's something that I could improve,
Mhm.
to find greater engagement or relatedness in my life.
Yeah. What a wonderful concept of being able to explore each of these areas. I'm curious, does your school ever implement the research that you have found and are sharing with others?
So I definitely don't push that. You know, don't want to be that guy in the
No.
building. But they do. So there's a strategy in the Will to Learn
Mhm.
called tracking moments of genuine connection, which is just kind of a basic approach to building relationships where students feel seen
Mm.
and making sure that you're keeping track of those so that you're attempting to build these relationships with all students. So
Mhm.
that's the one thing of my 12 years of writing that I've really seen my school um, latch onto and seek to implement now. For we're in um, this the first half of the second year of that.
Mhm.
um, you know and I'm gratified to see that people are
Yeah.
taking it, making it their own,
Yeah.
right? Because these things really, it's not like proprietary
Yeah.
information. It's
Right.
my books are really like just describing what is good teaching, what are effective practices, why do they work.
Yeah.
um, so it's fun to see people take, like people in
Yeah.
my building, take and make it their own.
Absolutely. I always like to ask because sometimes, and I speak with a lot of people who are like you, who are still in the classroom, still in schools, but offering so many things to other educators in the world. And I always wonder and curious whether their own schools realize what a gem they have and if they
Yeah,
implement any of those ideas. Um, I'm also curious because of your simple but such effective approach to teaching. Um, on your opinion of the rise of what we should call edutainment. I
yeah,
see this a lot especially over social media,
yeah,
that teachers, I feel like they almost feel pressured to do all of these things and have the fancy classrooms and,
right,
take hours of creating these moments, these
yeah,
in the guise of this is what our students deserve, right? So I'm
yeah.
curious as to your response to those, that rise of that edutainment idea.
Well, with all due respect for the heart that is doing those types of things, I think it's really ill advised.
Mm.
Um, because what we're really offering to our students, what they really deserve, is a chance to grow towards mastery of whatever we're teaching them, to become a stronger, fuller, more expansive human being by getting better at math or art or whatever.
Mhm.
And when we take extreme efforts to make like these super special, you know, again, kind of that Hollywood-esque approach,
Yeah.
right? I think we can send an unhelpful message
Mm.
that it's only worth paying attention, it's only worth caring about if it's like the next level of
Yes.
amazing. A
Yeah.
classroom's only good when it looks totally beautiful and like a cafe or whatever. Um, so yeah, all due respect to those efforts, but I do think you can unintentionally reinforce the problems that you're seeking to address with
Mm.
approaches like that versus an approach that's just really thinking about, how do I help all these young people to grow? How do I help them to all get actually better and to see that they did that? They became
Mhm.
better. You became better through efforts that you undertook. I mean, that's the real power of an education, and it's also something that is so much deeper and more powerful than like an edutainment type
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that those would be my unvarnished thoughts.
Yeah, and it's something that is a hotly debated topic. I like to hear what other people think of it. I, like you, I'm a fan of doing less things better and really refocusing our efforts on what our students actually need. So I'm so excited to hear you share your ideas on that as well. Um, we've been talking a lot about student motivation and how that's connected to so many other things, including credibility and classroom management. From your experience, what's one strategy that teachers could start using today that could enhance or deepen student motivation?
Okay, well, I mentioned the tracking moments of genuine connection earlier, but I'll go to a different one that I was just speaking to a colleague about. So I write about woodenization in the book as a way to enhance the effort belief, really to enhance growth mindset. So woodenization is named after John Wooden, who famously taught his college athletes to put on their socks and shoes in the best possible way on the first day of basketball practice.
Mm.
And Wooden repeatedly cited this as like a key insight into why he had the huge success that he had. So the idea is that if there's any learning conducive behavior you would like your students to do, you just want to very clearly, explicitly teach them how to do that, model for them how to do that, give them reinforcement on that. So easy areas where teachers could see big boosts in student motivation would be if you have students taking a test, teach them how to study for the test. Show them exactly how to study for the test. This would be a huge service to them and their motivation in your class, but very likely is the type of thing that they'll remember for years to come. It could change the trajectory of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be things like that. How do you take notes? Well, what do you do when you're confused? How do you resist distraction in this distracting world? So woodenization is just like really teach them how to do it.
Yes.
Have a little mini lesson where you teach them exactly like follow these steps. Think about these 3 bullet points.
Yes.
And you can go crazy with this one and you can do it for all types of things. And what you're doing there is signaling to your students that not all effort is equal.
Mm.
You're saying, I'm not a teacher that just wants you to work hard.
No.
I want you to work effectively. I want you to get a big bang for your buck because I know that your time is precious. So let me show you exactly how to study to be successful for this assessment. Let me show you exactly how to set yourself up for this essay that we're about to write or this project we're about to complete in art class.
That's so good because so many, and I know I've been guilty of this as an educator, there have been many times when I make the assumption that my students already know how to do that. I don't need to teach that, but that is, and I know I've seen it with my daughter that I assume she knows how to study for the SAT. And then I find her floundering and going, I never even thought that maybe you didn't have those skills. So being able to go in and explicitly teach them.
And that's why the Wooden is named after him because, I mean, wouldn't you assume that your college athlete, like they all know how to do this, right?
Yeah.
So he's saying, but you just, if there's anything that you want your learners to do, it's like you're in the best position to teach them and make sure that they're doing it the best way they can.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Assuming is a big cause of student demotivation in school. Massive cause.
That's important. I think that's really important for all of us to hear is that, say it again, assuming
is a massive cause of the demotivation that we see in students. Huge.
Yeah,
and you rightly pointed at that. And your daughter, I'm assuming like she's great, she's smart, she's ambitious.
Yeah.
But just like, I mean, the evidence from colleges is overwhelming that students study ineffectively in college.
Oh, yeah.
So
for sure.
that's an unforced error, like it doesn't have to be that way. And we can start to create change in our own classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you do speak all over the world, all over the US. So what are some trends that you've been noticing over the last 12 to 18 months in education right now? Are there any that excite you?
Good redirect. Yeah, because I was going to say, demoralization and exhaustion. So what excites me? I think what excites me is that there's still mission-driven people in education. Everywhere that I go, there's people who got into this job to make a difference, just like I did, just like you did. And like, so there's still these people that are coming forth despite the difficulty, despite how it's getting harder every year. There are these people with these great intentions. And that excites me because, when I read about teaching shortages, that really it really worries me because we need people that are drawn to this incredibly powerful work. And I do think on the whole, I make it a point to regularly talk to teachers who've done this for 3 decades or more,
Mm.
recent retirees that really retired well, ended on a high note. Because I just want to be reminded that these types of careers are possible, and these are people that are really grateful
Mm.
for how they've spent their life. So that excites me. That
Mhm.
excites me.
Anything that concerns you that's a trend right
I
now?
mean, yeah, definitely the teacher demoralization and exhaustion, and certainly AI is deeply unnerving
Mm.
to me.
Mhm.
You know, I just think that of my whole career, that's likely going to be the biggest disruptor based on everything that I'm seeing, and you know, there's a lot of opportunity,
Yeah.
I think, but there's just it's going to force a lot of a lot of adjustment, change, recalibration. New
Mhm.
pedagogies will spawn forth from it, already are, and you know, when you're a guy that's kind of identified like these are the things I want to work on for the rest of my career, like yeah, it's I'm paying attention. I'm
Mhm.
paying attention to it and I'm
Mhm.
thinking about it a lot.
Yeah. And totally understandable. And it's something I think we all, as educators, everybody I think can see both sides of the benefits and the
Yeah,
dangers of it. And um, the fact that there's not a container yet around the ethics component
right.
is something that, at least for me, I still get concerned about with AI. And so
Yeah.
hopefully that's
Yeah.
something that can be addressed sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So, what is the best way that our audience can stay in touch with you and find out more?
Well, the best way is to visit my website, Dave Stewart Jr., STUARTJR.com.
Great.
They'll see a newsletter link. I always tell people that's kind of the best way if you just want little doses of my thinking. That's really that's kind of the whole backbone of my whole approach. But you can Google my books, The Will to Learn These 6 Things. That will give you um, a big old dose of the way that I approach this work. And I'd love for people to connect and reach out.
Wonderful. And we're going to put all of those links in our show notes so that everybody can easily find you and all of the incredible work that you do. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom with us as so that we can all learn from you.
My pleasure, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Of course.